We're really, really pleased to have Laura back with us today, because Laura joined us a few years ago to do the Masters in Literary Translation that we have here. And since then, she's gone on to do amazing things. So when I saw that she was back in Dublin, I was really keen to get her back so that we could catch up properly. So could you start us off with what brought you to do the MPhil in the first place, and then what happened after that?
Yeah, to start. So I actually had a somewhat unconventional path to do the master's in translation when I was living in Spain after I finished university. I was already really interested in translation and actually thought about doing the master's at that point. So it would have been like to date myself like 2017 something. No, I'm becoming slightly embarrassing. 2015. But because PhD programs in the US usually combine a master's and a PhD, I basically all of my old supervisors told me just go for the PhD in the US and you'll get funding throughout the whole thing. So I went to the US to do my PhD at Cornell, and as one person put it, I kind of did an undercover comparative literature degree where I started in the English department, but sneakily started taking classes in the Spanish department for the master's portion. And got really interested in networks of exchange between England and Spain in the early modern period. And I finished the master's portion of the PhD, but I still had the translation itch, and I knew that I wanted to work on that for the doctoral thesis or dissertation in the US, like still doing
Still the way around.
interlingual translation, England and or English and Ireland versus English in the US. But for my doctoral dissertation. And so I had kind of the crazy idea to take a year off from my PhD program and apply to do the master's here and apply for funding like mad, basically, for whatever I could get. And was unsuccessful with a couple of ones. But I remember you kindly knew I was looking for funding and sent me the Government of Ireland fellowship information, and I like pounced on that. I was very lucky to get that, and I ended up being able to come here and got to take all of the fun classes that the students here get to take. And one of them, actually, Michael Cronin's class on the history of translation, I ended up using that paper as kind of the basis for my dissertation in the US. Yeah. So when I went back to the US, firstly, my friends all made fun of me because now I was master. Which is like an insane thing to do. I don't know if I necessarily fully recommend. But I ended up doing, I didn't realize at the time, but a digital humanities kind of basis for the project, where I was looking at paratext of translations from Spanish into English and what kind of materials were being published at the time in the 16th and 17th centuries, where they were being published, why they were being published, who they were being published for, dedicated to, and so forth. And basically the intro kind of part of the project is on the fact that the English were just like absolutely gobbling up Spanish texts and bringing them into English, but there was absolutely basically nothing kind of going the other way around, except, eventually I can get to that, but that's actually my postdoc project now. Yeah, so I don't know if you want me to go into the details of the.
So that's during the 16th and 17th century.
Yeah.
So Spain was really like the hegemon, the cultural hegemon maybe, and then England was kind of subservient at the time and taking stuff from the Spanish, and the Spanish were not really interested.
Yeah, they were pasando de. Yeah, they were kind of passing on England and English literature at that moment. But yeah, in terms of imperial politics, the Spanish were kind of the first ones to really like stake out their claim in the colonial world, and had their invincible Armada, which wasn't so invincible, it turned out in the end. But at the time, yeah, Spain was kind of the premier empire, you could say, the one that was going to take up the mantle of the Roman Empire for the early modern period. And in terms of literature, they were also putting out a lot of important material, but it was also through if in terms of literary influence, it was also kind of the basis was really more in Italy, I would say.
Okay.
And so the Italian Renaissance getting translated into Spain and then through Spain into England and also through other avenues. Yeah, so there were a lot of translations as well. The other ones that were kind of up there with a number of Spanish translations were French and Italian.
Right. Okay.
English. Yeah.
So prestige languages.
Yeah.
And what kind of things were the English translating from Spain? Just everything.
They really like they had a lot of practical manuals, so anything that had to do with like mining, for instance, navigation manuals were bestsellers for that point. Like, I think my favorite manual though had to be like a guide for the uses of chocolate.
Oh,
like there was the most delightful paratext, like an ode to chocolate, and like medicinal usages. So anything that had to do with like Spanish knowledge of basically their ability to navigate the world, go out and well, really
conquer
exploit, to put it not so nicely.
Yeah.
As well as knowledge of other cultures. So another, actually, what maybe would interest you, there were a couple editions of Jesuit writings on Japan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and like the uses of chopsticks come out from one of the paratexts for that. Or knowledge about China. There are a number of Spanish texts that were translated in English on that. So kind of practical knowledge about the world. There were also a lot of materials on philosophy, I would say. Literature, definitely. That's where I zoomed in on things. For example, like Cervantes was translated a fair amount in like the 17th century. For the 16th century, though, the most popular, and even into the 17th, were romance novels.
Okay.
And chivalric literature, those kinds of things, which is what I go into case studies and like do the deep dives into those. Kind of the.
And was that driven by them being the most numerous, or because they have like an impact, or because you just like them, or what was it that drove you towards chivalric stuff?
Doesn't everyone just want to read about knights roaming around the plains? I guess because they were popular literature, so it was something that the courts were reading, but also more kind of as lay of a public as you could get. Like one of the modern introductions to Amadis de Gaula, which is one of the main chivalric tales from the time, says that like Amadis was a common name for a dog at the time, for instance. So it's the kind of tale that got like recycled into popular culture and the upper echelons. Or like La Diana was really popular among the courts of Elizabeth, for instance. And there were a lot of like pastoral little masks and things that they would put on, sort of related to that genre. So the popularity of it, but also the way that it speaks to a lot of pastoral and romance literature was about the love and about like the beautiful landscapes and things like that. But it was also very much about like colonialism and the New World. So there were a lot of resonances of, like for instance, there's a lot of images in La Diana of like pearls and jewels and some gold and other things, and like it's sort of a thin veil for the court masquerading as these like pastoral shepherds and things, having their intermingled romances, entanglements, and things. So on the one hand, it's kind of frivolous sounding, and the moralists thought that like they were gonna corrode the youth basically of the time, or corrupt the youth of the time. But on the other hand, it was also pretty serious and about like how to go find other lands and take what you can for them, and like frame like love as conquest is kind of the framework for it. So the conquistadors would famously use some of these fantastical stories to talk about the New World, like Amadis de Gaula's referenced in the first visions of Tenochtitlan, for instance. That's like a famous quote. But at the same time, so used as a way to like frame those, but at the same time, then the New World conquest kind of got absorbed back into the popular chivalric literature, and so then the chivalric literature also became about the New World conquest. So there's like fun things that happen in translation too, when the English start to take over those narratives from the Spanish.
And how were they translating? Like, were they consciously trying to keep it sounding Spanish, or were they kind of absorbing stuff for their own use, like the English court?
I would say generally for their own use. Some people would say that they were trying to teach about the Spanish culture, like some editions were specifically multilingual, so they would have like
Oh, both. Okay.
bilingual, or even some had like multiple languages, like French, Spanish, and English, or Italian, kind of take your pick. So in some ways it could be used as like a language learning tool. It could also be used as a way to like learn about the source culture if you're going on travels or something like that. So they were used pedagogically, but then at the same time, some people would argue that the English were kind of taking these narratives as their own sort of, we're gonna dominate the Spanish in the literature and in real life, and go out and be kind of the ones who are conquering these lands now. So there's definitely that vein of translation strategies. But then the things that I'm looking at are a little bit more subversive. So for instance, in the translation of Amadís de Gaula, one of my favorite finds was that it went through French, which is, I remember mentioning this to you, that I had to learn French as a side note of like things that as one does in your PhD. Because it turned out that I was going absolutely nuts trying to track down like, where is this passage? I was trying to find something that I couldn't see in the Spanish, and they were like expanding like a 50-word section up to like 150 words. So adding like a lot of material to it. And it turned out that it was first going through French, and then via the French, they were anthologizing certain parts of it and then using as rhetorical manuals. And then the English actually translated that first rather than the full text. And the French had added a section to this, like a rhetorical model that doesn't exist in the Spanish. And then the English took that. Which is a long way to get to the fact that this rhetorical model was really interestingly a form to reject the tyranny of the English. So it was written from the perspective of an Irish king in this fantastical, like Arthur Britannia kind of world, but still like an Irish king saying that like animating his troops to be able to go out and like fight the English, that they wanted to throw off the yoke of slavery. And yeah, so, and they didn't, then they kept it in the English, and it's not like they took that out, even though that was published, I want to say, if I remember correctly, the 1560s or 1570s. So definitely when there was Elizabeth or Tudor interest in Ireland.
Right. So it was an Irish story written in Spanish, translated into French, and elaborated in French, and then from French to English.
No, I guess it was, well, not an Irish story, like the King Arthur kind of is sort of one of the bases for the popular literature. So I don't think is that Irish?
King Arthur is British, okay. but it's
I guess that's the.
But it was not like a Spanish story about Spain. It was kind of doing a big circle. Okay.
Exactly. So like Britain also, like all of the British Isles appear in the text. Yeah.
That's weird, kind of circuitous thing.
But yes, then so that kind of storyline into Spanish, and then into French, and then back into English, and then giving them a rhetorical model to be practiced, and like, because it's full of like other speeches like people could perform and repeat. Yeah, so giving people in English a way to resist English rule.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Okay. So but you said something earlier about the essay that you wrote for for theory and history, going on to being kind of mushrooming up to being a fundamental part of your thesis. So how does an essay, which is like less than 4,000 words, turn into a full PhD dissertation?
I guess because the seed of the idea was there. I knew before going into the master's that there was a lot more interest in Spanish materials in English at the time than the other way around. So I was curious about these. So I just started on my own with just a Word document, reading through all these paratexts and looking like at as many of them as I possibly could by like very limited means. So the paper that I wrote the paper that I wrote was a summary of those kind of limited findings.
Okay.
And I knew that there was just so much more there that there was no way I was going to be able to cover in whatever that was, 10 pages or something, something like that. So I expanded it, and then I guess since this is sort of about career things too, I got like really rough feedback when I took it to a conference, and someone was like, "You can't do this. That's too much for a PhD student to take on." And I was like, really devastated afterward, honestly. But then I talked to some friends about it, and I realized like, oh, I'm like doing this is like, I think the person who's critiquing it was looking at it as close reading from like a literary perspective.
Right.
Really, what I was trying to do was distant reading from afar for that part of the kind of basis of the project, anyway. So then I ended up applying for like a digital humanities fellowship and was able to like put things in a spreadsheet, which is much easier to deal with.
Yeah.
Like I tried talking to somebody about like, is there any way Python could like analyze my Word document that was like 100 pages? Like, but they were like, no, you need to start over. So I ended up using web scraping of a database that worked Spanish English translations, or well, early English books online, and like searching for translations and then organizing the information from there. So yeah, that gave me like the foundation to go into the case studies.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really nice to hear that we often conceptualize those essays as like, I mean, they have certain learning outcomes associated with them, but they're really, PhD thesis is not one of them. PhD thesis is a lovely kind of outcome that you've had, but for most of the students, it's like we're trying to train you how to write for your dissertation for the MPhil.
Yeah.
So it's actually really inspiring to me that you kind of had this idea in that context, and it just kind of kept growing. But obviously, you had to change the way you were doing it, because if you were trying to do a close reading, you'd still be doing it now, and for several years.
Was right. I couldn't close read 200 paratexts. That just wasn't possible. So,
but do you find
information?
I guess that was a conference in the States, was it?
Actually, it was online because that was COVID. It was literally the first week of shutdown. So it was online with a Renaissance conference. But actually, the scholar was from the UK. So.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, so.
I was just talking earlier on about how slow the field of translation studies is to move towards digital humanities and kind of non close reading approaches. Like it feels like close reading is still the default. And then if you do something else, you kind of have to explain this is not close reading actually. Have you found that, or have you found like when you're presenting, everyone just gets what you're saying?
Well, that one definitely.
Not that one.
was a strong no. But since then, I think people are usually pretty receptive to it. But since I'm not for the digital humanities aspect, it's more just to gather information and be able to like get a lay of the land in terms of quantities of what was being translated and where it was being published. So I think people are receptive to those kinds of issues, but actually it's true in a, I don't know if I'm like allowed to talk about that, but in a resubmission for an article that I'm working on or just finished actually, the reviewer was like, do you really need quantification in this? Because I was just trying to track like the amount that something, there's a consistent pattern of expansion that was like, I want to say above like 20 to 30% in some cases of the number of words being added from Spanish and English. And to my knowledge, it usually goes the other way when you're going into English, contraction. And in the poetry sections, the translator was just going wild. Like he was adding, in most cases, like maybe 2 lines to each stanza, but this is like 10. So I was trying to give like some quantifiable kind of basis, which to me makes the argument more legitimate. I would think. But the reviewer was like, what are you doing? Do I really need that?
Right.
So I think.
Did you say yes?
Yeah, I did say yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, they might have just wanted more of an explanation from me, to be fair, which is what I ended up But yeah, I guess that I think it wasn't automatically assumed that would be an addition. It was kind of like, what is this doing?
Yeah.
In a
But reviewers are human beings too, and it's amazing how frequently people I notice have like a really visceral reaction to statistics. If you're in the humanities and you start saying like, this is the percentage.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, maybe it was just that. I mean, they were very nice about it, to be fair. You were number 2, lovely. So great feedback overall. But yeah, I guess it was just maybe a gut kind of like, it's not, I don't know that that's something normal, but I think people are trying to incorporate more digital semantics methods. I know that Journal of the Submitted to they're like actively recruiting more articles.
Oh, great.
In that vein. So
great.
And promoting projects and things
yeah.
that aren't like an article form. So
great.
I think slowly getting there. But yeah, I mean, it's not like my statistics are like very impressive. They literally just like a word count. Like,
but still,
I could do it in high school math, like 80 words over. Yeah, hopefully that can be normal.
Hopefully, tiny steps at a time. So that was your PhD thesis, and congratulations belatedly on that. And then so this is your 3rd year in Ireland, is that right? Or second year in Ireland. And so what is the project that you've been doing here? How is it related to that project? And what have you been up to?
Yeah, good question. My supervisor will want to know. Yeah, so I did mention that like there were some trickles of translations back from English into Spanish, and it turned out that those translations were of anti-Catholic materials, generally speaking. So, and actually another moment of like, I get really rough feedback, but then you just gotta take it with a grain of salt and move on. When I was originally applying actually for the master's, I was trying to figure out like Irish Spanish connections, and found out based on an interviewer who was, I would say, not the kindest about his feedback, but did give me a good idea to look into Jesuit colleges. And
in Spain.
As like an Irish, specifically like Irish Jesuit colleges. So I knew that there was some anti-Catholic material that had been published from the English recusant Catholics who had either moved or had written from jail, and then their writings were kind of smuggled out. But the Jesuit colleges, it turned out, had amassed like massive amounts of documents writing about the colonial situation in Ireland, or so not everyone call it colonial plantation system, I guess, in Ireland around the early 1600s. So I went and looked at Maynooth's archives actually when I was here for the master's, and I knew that there was some translation material in there of anti-Catholic materials from English translated into Spanish. And so I kept that little nugget of information. I guess that's a word of advice, is like keep those little nuggets that you're like, oh, that's an interesting kind of weird thing that's happening. Like maybe I can do something with that later. Turns out you can't. So the postdoc project is really getting into those translations, and basically I'm trying to expand notions of what translation is also through it. So I'm definitely looking at the interlingual translations of edicts, for instance, that were translated from English into Spanish, and a lot of times with commentary too. So for instance, they would like write, one of my favorite ones is the person would be going along translating from Spanish into English, or from English into Spanish, and then put in little parenthetical statements of like, and this is where they call us papists, and then like so they keep translating. This is where they call us like the false religion when they're really the false religion, and I keep going, and then like continue kind of like poking, like literally like poking holes and like tearing apart their argument. Although there are the ones that are more point by point. There's different like styles of that kind of resistance. So definitely looking at the interlingual translations and translation as a form of commentary as well. But then also just looking at translation in terms of like the literal like carrying across. Because the reason the Jesuit colleges have all these materials is because they trained priests, and they took young Irish men, trained them as priests, and then smuggled them back on merchant ships. So maybe needs to write a historical novel about this. were very good for it. Smuggles them back into Ireland, and then they would continue practicing in secret, and then write letters back to Spain in Spanish. So kind of the literal like carrying across of like information, translation in a physical sense that way. And then also I'm looking at translation in the it's now lost sense, but the Renaissance sense of like transmutation. So the idea of like transforming the actual like nature of the thing that you're working on. So there are some translations or like writings. I can't actually find sources for them, but they seem to be translations of natural histories of Ireland, where they describe Ireland as like a pure space that's and not, how to say it, like they're
polluted.
yeah, basically like not polluted, not like there says that there are no venomous animals, and not only are there venomous animals, like there are even the bark of the trees can like cure things that are venomous, and so it's like ultra like purity. So kind of, which is a direct contrast to what English writers were saying at the time. We're calling like there's some really nasty things about like describing like the different plantations as like limbs, and like really haunting with like descriptions of like Ulster, for instance, as like a limb that's infected, and like the only solution is to cut it off from the rest, actually, which like historically speaking is a little haunting. So basically like describing Ireland as like diseased, as polluted, as infected in various ways, and as a venom, that kind of thing. So it's like the Irish descriptions in Spanish I think are really directly trying to like purify the vision of Ireland from that perspective. So yeah, that's kind of, and I guess that's part one. And then part two is to actually get these materials out into the public. So I'm doing translation, funnily enough, now translations back into English from Spanish to go into the Maynooth University Library and do an exhibition.
Oh, nice.
In like a couple of physical exhibitions in Maynooth.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
And how many of these documents are there? Is it thousands or is it tens? Thousands. Okay.
Real talk about like where my the ambitions of the project mobility, how much one can physically process in a certain amount of time. The whole archive at Maynooth, which is the archive, includes the archives of, I think it's 5 different Jesuit colleges in Spain. So Salamanca, Santiago de Compostela, Sevilla, Alcalá de Henares, and also Lisboa, interestingly, but I haven't found anything in Portuguese yet. So those all contain 50,000 documents.
Wow.
So so my secondment supervisor in Spain, thankfully, when I was writing the proposal, was like, you're gonna drown.
Yeah.
Literally drown all those papers. So you need to like put a limit on it. So I'm working on the first 50 years of the college from 1592.
50 years.
But looking back now, I've only actually been able to get through like really like get through like 130 documents.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel it when I look at the boxes, they're like literally overflowing with documents. I feel, like I could do more. But yeah, really more like I think the actual like results are going to be around 130 plus some contextual materials that are related. Yeah.
I suppose you have to leave some stuff for other people.
Yeah. There's plenty if anyone is interested.
And how did you curate what you're gonna do? Like, did you just start from like day one and then work from there, or did you say I'm gonna do all the ones that fit into this mold, or like how did you decide what you're actually gonna focus on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started with the foundational documents, like for instance the letters from various people in support of the college, like from the King of Spain at the time wrote a personal letter in support of the Irish cause. There are papal bulls in support of the Irish cause, which made me have to learn like the tiniest bit of Latin, which is really
painful.
Fun, but yeah, it's definitely, I need to work more on that. But so like, or there's one of my favorite ones that I found was there were letters of support from the Archbishop of Cusco in Peru, who like helped fund the library that one of the rectors was putting together.
Wow.
In Salamanca, and was hopefully going to take back to Waterford, but that didn't, because of Cromwell, was just made like impossible. So really like big networks of support. So I started with those documents, and then from there really started to look into anything that was on translation and anything that was describing Ireland and the Irish, like Irish forms of community, it's Irish identity from exile. Those were kind of the main focal points, is kind of who's supporting this work, how are they supporting it, and how are the Irish priests themselves kind of conceptualizing their own identities from exile. And translation like played a big role in that.
And so I know that you already have your next step kind of this planned out to some extent. Do you think that this project will travel with you, or are you just done with it now?
Yeah, the hard thing about doing a postdoc like the Marie Curie one is that it needs to be different from your doctoral thesis. So I still have like things for my doctoral thesis pending. So I need to like finish my book on that first. So I'm doing this like kind of weird like what do you call it, where you hop leapfrog?
Yeah, leapfrogging
things. So I'm going to finish up the main bits from this project that I promise. Definitely like the library exhibition and the digital stuff online, and some articles. So that'll be done, and I'm trying to like get that as much done and dusted as I can. But then when I start my new position in the US, I'll have to go back to the book. But it is kind of nice in a way that now that I've had time away from the doctoral dissertation, now I understand the translation networks a lot more deeply. And so that is going to inform. Like I'll definitely write a better book from the thesis now than I would have before. But then probably after that, I'll go back to the Spanish material.
Great. Well, it sounds like there'll still be plenty more for you to go back to. But do you think, like, obviously the postdoc has taken on quite a heavy Irish flavor as well. Do you think that's going to travel with you throughout your, throughout your career, but in the next stages of your research as well?
Yeah, definitely. I'm already envisioning, I don't know if I can teach it in my undergrad class. I'll have to see, but I'm already thinking like for my teaching, I'm like dying a little bit to teach a post-colonial Shakespeare class. And like I remember, I think I'm actually talking about translations by Brian Gabriel. It came up in our class
several times, probably.
But I didn't read it until this year, actually. Sessions. But and my mind was like blown because I was like, oh my God, this is a response to Shakespeare, actually, like a Romeo and Juliet, like what's in a name and like the place names in the play. So for my teaching, absolutely, like I really want to find a way to teach, like for instance, a pairing like that. And then for the book, definitely, like for even like I mentioned in that example from the chivalric literature, like there already kind of was a little bit of an Irish flavor, interestingly enough, in there. And then, I think just in general, I think the case of Ireland in the early modern world is really interesting because it's part of Europe, but it's kind of playing this interesting role where it can't quite be categorized. Also, like Spanish can't quite be categorized in the ways we might want to. Like, for instance, Spanish is in many ways a colonial language that was, forced on a lot of people, obviously, across the world. But at the same time, in the context of Ireland, it was actually used as like an anti-colonial language. And Irish people who traveled to Spain and then from there elsewhere have really interesting stories. I mean, it's not something that I'm working on, but there's a really, really good book by Thomas O'Connor, who was a professor at Maynooth, who's retired now, about Inquisition materials and how, like, sometimes Irish people would kind of play the lines between religion. Like if they were, for instance, working for the English and they got caught by the Spanish, they'd be like, oh, they just forced us to be Protestant. We're not really Protestant, we're Catholic. Like in our heart and souls. But then like they get released, and then it's like the other way around. But it's just kind of like using that like ambiguity as a mode of survival, or I don't know, their identities were like very flexible in that kind of way. So, and like for instance, there was one case, I think his name was William Lampert, who was sent to Mexico and to work for the Catholic Church there, and he was sent out into the indigenous populations and the enslaved populations there, African populations there, to kind of quell unrest. But he actually ended up writing this. I haven't read it, but according to the description in the book, like basically like a document that contains like anti-slavery rhetoric in like the early 1600s, which is really, I think, really shocking. But it might, then there's this ambiguity of like, was he just doing it to gain their trust, or did he actually mean it? But then he did end up dying by the hand of the Inquisition because he was going against their corruption and things. So I think there's just like there are a lot of really interesting stories out there that I would love to get to explore. So we'll see where life takes me, but because sometimes I do end up getting kind of washed ashore places I don't necessarily expect. But I have the nuggets that I hold on to, and so
we'll always be looking forward to welcoming you back again for a trip. And by the way, we have visiting research fellowships here, so if you ever have the interest in coming, and purely for my own interest. So when I did my PhD, I was focusing mostly on medieval translation. A lot of it was Chaucer, and what people write all the time, again and again and again, is, oh, medieval times have such a bad reputation. Everyone's focused on like the classics, on like Latin and Greek, and we knew how they translated. But in the Middle Ages, we call it the Dark Ages, and people were just like taking stuff from all over the place. And that was what really like took me, because when people were translating in the Middle Ages, they absolutely were not trying to convey the spirit of the original or something like that. They were absolutely writing for people who still understood the source text. Like if you're translating from French, you were translating for people who spoke French. So it was not so that you could broaden the audience. It was so that you could put your own stamp on it.
Yeah.
And it always occurred to me that the early modern period, like up until you get mechanized print, it's probably something kind of similar to how they were doing it in the Middle Ages, but not quite, because you suddenly got all this empire stuff going on and all this power play, which you didn't really have in the Middle Ages. So do you see that kind of pattern, and is it the same, just purely for my own interest? Like, does what I just described, does that ring a bell to you?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense of the invention, I guess, and think back to the ones that I did for my case studies. I mean, I guess the ones I'm thinking of that I did for my case studies, which would be The Prison of Love, or Cárcel de Amor, La Diana, and Amadís de Gaula. Those three, I would say they were overall kind of still following the spirit of the original, I guess you could say, but at the same time, they were clearly also making major changes to the text. And maybe taking parts of the spirit of the original that wouldn't necessarily be the most flattering for the English audience.
Yeah.
And so putting their stamp on in that kind of a
subversive way. Yeah.
And these particular ones, there are other people who would read them as just kind of like both
straightforward.
Yeah. But there's for instance also in the translation of some picaresque novels, there's some interesting paratexts for those where there's kind of mirrors that get turned to the audience, and you think that they're being translated for kind of just like laughing at the characters in Spanish, but from the Spanish tradition. But then they start to use, I love pronouns, like they start to use you a lot.
Right.
And so the you kind of now speaks to the English audience. And so
Okay.
he's actually getting made fun of. I think it gets more complicated than people have really
Yeah.
given it credit for. And in that particular translation, interestingly enough, the translator is he's very playful, let's say, or sassy. Like he leaves one of the paratexts in Spanish, which would kind of go along with what you're saying, that like people are only fully in on the joke if they know the Spanish. And he signs it as like Don Diego puede ser, like third I don't know what the equivalent of Diego would be, but Diego like could be basically. So if you don't know Spanish, you might think of like, oh, it's just like
that's his
like,
name, puede ser.
Senor. Yeah, but if you do know Spanish, then you are in on the joke, and so it kind of depends on the perspective of like the way who's reading it and like what knowledge they already have.
Yeah.
So I think somewhat, but maybe it's a bit in a.
It's probably developed since.
Yeah.
I mean, you have at least some print during the Renaissance period and afterwards, and like print really is a turning point, because as soon as you can print something multiple times, it's not the case that every single text you produce is handwritten and therefore kind of carries inherent change because people make mistakes or people just do things differently. So I'd expect it to be different, but I just wondered whether it plucked a chord for you.
But it's interesting that like because I remember reading an article for a medieval class that was really good about that. And it was interesting, so the author mentioned that like the invention of print kind of closed off manuscript culture, but the Irish materials in Spain actually showed that like manuscript culture actually was still functioning in that, because none of it's in print, it's all handwritten.
It's all
documents. As I said, there are like 50,000
yeah.
So they were still using that kind of method of translation, but it just survived in a very particular environment rather than just like the normal kind of what you would encounter on the street. And weirdly enough, the edicts, for instance, that are being translated, I was talking to someone because I couldn't find the originals anywhere, so I wasn't sure if they were pseudo translations. That was also a thing to like pretend it was a translation, so that you could get favor, like, oh, look at all this nasty stuff that the English are doing to us, but really it's like they just made it up. But actually, it does seem like they were real, and the problem was that the pamphlets would have been printed and pasted on, so they were more ephemeral in a way, whereas the manuscripts were kind of sent and protected, and like the translations became a kind of archiving sort of method, and like held in their little vault for hundreds of years. So it's interesting that like things just got kind of just turned around from like just like sent into different avenues. With the rise of print, but it's not like it disappeared necessarily.
So does that mean that the documents that you're working with are all in like chancery hand? Are you trying to decode all this flowery handwriting?
The paleography is some people have very nice handwriting, but there are others from the 1600s that I would like to have a word with. They're so difficult. There was one that I saw, and it was actually one of the few documents in English, and I just stared at it for like 5 minutes. Like I have nothing. Now I can actually read it, which is amazing. So I've stared at these for a year and a half. But yeah, no, but interestingly, something else I should mention with manuscript culture is that the originals, they have originals from like around the early 1600s, but then people would keep copying them. So there were also copies from like the 19th century and 20th century as well. So sometimes one document will have like 3 or 4 versions of like the original and like 2 or 3 copies, and sometimes even a translation back into English, or a translation into Latin, or a translation into Spanish if it was originally in Latin. So they were like clearly like very intent on like keeping that knowledge alive. In that form, but not in print. There's, I think, one papal bull that I found that was in print, but other than that, they're all manuscript, hand copied. Yeah,
that's strange.
And I do appreciate the 19th century translators because they have lovely handwriting. Like, yes, it comes with a transcription.
I can read.
Oh, it's like my eyes are just like breath of fresh air. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, and where are you going to after you finish this postdoc?
So I'm going to the University of Michigan to start a professor position in the English department. But an English department that seems excited about, they're very into the Shakespeare and,
I bet they are.
real kind of connections. So, and they were really interested in the Irish materials, actually. So, yeah.
And other people there in translation studies, or will you be a pioneer?
No, they're actually, that was when I got so excited when I was reading their faculty profiles. They actually do have a really big conflict department and a fair number of people who are active, like, I don't know if they study translations, but people who are translators themselves. So
nice.
Yeah.
So you'll fit in.
Exactly. I won't be the odd one out. Which sometimes I feel like translation studies is the only place where I feel like, oh, I'm fully at home because when I go to an English department, sometimes I'm like talking about Spanish in English, and they're like, why should we care? Again, and then when I go to a Spanish department, sort of thing, then it feels a little bit like, and yeah, stuff. So yeah, it's nice. I'm lucky that it seems like it will feel like home. It seems. Yeah.
Good. Well, that's exciting, and I'm going to look forward to hearing how it goes. Please do let me know. And I wonder whether there are any questions from the audience while we've been talking. Does anyone have a question?
Actually be teaching English.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I guess early modern studies. So like, for instance, next year I'll be teaching a Shakespearean adaptation class with like a few Shakespeare plays and then modern adaptations of them. I haven't put in the friel yet because I'm worried it's going to be I don't know if that would take too much context for students in the US to learn. So I'm debating about, I would love to put them in, but we'll find out. And then one on like the rise of global English, for instance. So like the rise of colonialism, but seen like through literary trends where you get like kind of the colonial, like imperialistic, I'm going to dominate the world with this, but also the more subversive stuff. And then what is my third one? I do get to teach one that's on translation. Okay. So yeah, I'm like moving from, I don't know, I feel like you're tired of this, but from domestication to foreignization. Oh, yeah. So looking at translation as like an intimate act of reading from Spivak and like what actually feels more intimate with getting to know another culture, like reading a work that's like fully domesticated versus one that's a lot more actively foreignizing and seeing how the students kind of react to the different versions. So yeah, mainly early modern stuff, but I get to throw in a little trend, yeah. Sneak it in. Yeah. Yeah.
That'll be exciting.
Yeah.
Are you ready for all the teaching?
I think so. Yeah. I say that now, but
yes, great, fine.
I've learned lessons. Like this year, I realized I made some mistakes in my syllabus where I gave myself too much work, and the students. So I've learned better for them and better for me to just cut the busy work and get straight to it. But I think so. I've taught like versions of those classes before.
Oh, that's handy.
Yeah, not exactly the same thing, but at least have like a sense of what I'm doing.
That's good. That's a nice place to start from. It's always a bit disconcerting when you arrive in a new place and they say, okay, I know that you're interested in Elizabethan English. We need you to teach about Dickens. Good luck.
I'm very spoiled, I feel.
I know. Just amazing.
That should be the norm. Yeah. So.
Anyone, please.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about at the very beginning of the talk about how in Spain they were not receiving or translating anything, but actually there were a lot of English translations. Yeah. It made me think a lot about opera because I studied Italian Spanish translation during my PhD, and basically they were also not receiving anything from the Italian opera, not even the Italian ones.
Really? And what time period?
At the very beginning, like the 17th, at the beginning of the 17th century.
Okay. Huh.
Started becoming really popular. And basically, they were focusing on their zarzuelas. So they were completely focused on that. But actually, the Italian opera was translating a lot of Love de Vegas
No way.
things, and they were putting them into music.
I would,
So,
that,
and it
they
was-
would, and to be fair, those would be pretty dramatic, I feel,
course.
operatic force.
Of course, and it was so strange to see that was the only country that was not receiving anything. So I was wondering, did you find in all of these documents something about also like theater or music that was translated into English?
Theater into English. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of which ones. Yeah, there was the La Celestina was translated a couple of times, so which I really would love to look. That was on my initial ambitious plan for the thesis, and my supervisors looked at the proposal and were like, "Laura, you can do like one of these things." Propose. So yeah, like La Celestina. There's Peregrino in su Patria was another one that got translated. A lot of interesting. The other ones that I know of were more like the exemplary novels were translated, but whatever you want to call it, adapted into plays. So there are, I want to say like this. It's been a while since I've looked at these, but there are a few different examples of. I want to say the Spanish Gypsy might be one of them, La Gitania. But there are a few different ones that got translated. Emily, I think the name's Weisborg. Speaking of not being good with names, no, I wish I remembered. She wrote a book called Bad Blood that was on Spanish English translations, and especially like the theatrical side of it. So there are definitely some plays. Not as many, I would say, as other types of literary works, like especially prose. They seem specifically really interested in prose fiction, which would kind of make sense because that's another thing. I just realized I forgot to mention from the paper that I wrote. I was interested in polysystems theory. I'm like, what was causing the things to be translated? And one of the reasons was like for a vacuum, and like prose was kind of on the rise in England, but they didn't really have many models for it. So they took from the Spanish. So I would say I saw more of prose, more travel literature, more like manuals, more philosophy, that kind of thing. But there are some plays that were sprinkled in there. Yeah, definitely La Celestina would be the most exciting for me personally. But it's so interesting that like did you find out why they weren't translating anything Italian?
Like they weren't really interested in the opera because they said we have our
You're just already,
and it's up with us. To be fair, it was pretty similar, like in the sense of how it was built to the opera. So it was kind of similar. So they were focusing on that and not on opera in general.
One like fun thing that I found, which is it's not a nice thing that the English said about them, but I don't remember which pair of texts I found this in, but they were like going through the different like peoples of Europe, and for the Spanish they called them arrogant. So I think maybe they were like, we're good. You know, maybe that's what got them their unfortunate description in this English catalog.
They were No, French people, like in France, they were more receiving. They were pretty critical, but still they were receiving. In Spain, they said.
Well, it's interesting because like in the beginning, that's what I was saying earlier. Like the Spanish at the beginning of the 1500s were taking from the Italian, at least in like the poetic traditions, like Petrarch, for instance, got really popular. Another amorous kind of like manuals and literature and those types of things were popular in Spain. But I guess like maybe as Italy kind of faded a bit into the background and Spain became the main power, then they didn't feel the need. They didn't have the vacuum to like fill things. So they were just kind of, we're satiated. No need for that there.
It's really funny. And actually later on they started receiving some of the opera bats from French translations.
Of Italian works.
The
early modern world is so weird in a delightful ways. Like what? Huh.
They were not really having it.
Well, I guess that may also maybe with rivalry, I wonder, because they were in struggle for control of Italy, so maybe I don't know, they didn't want to admit the influence or something. Yeah, I'm really surprised, especially because Italian opera is so famous, you know, with Arte and all of that. So it's a nugget. That's a nugget you think about for while you're probably working on it still.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Please.
Sort of from French, Latin, sort of languages that you would necessarily translate from. I was wondering if you would count the Irish language at all, and do you think it would help in sort of problematizing cultural purity, particularly in a colonial context, even beyond 16th and 17th century?
Yeah.
I find it kind of unnecessary to because you have an English perspective, Spanish perspective.
Yeah.
Do you think it would help to have Irish?
I fully expected to need Irish, and I started one class. I learned how to ask for a cup of tea, but I saw it's quite an embarrassment actually that I've been here for a year and a half and I still haven't learned Irish. But one day I'll get there. But interestingly, in the documents I've looked through, I have not encountered any Irish so far, and any Irish language materials so far. And I don't know if that's, and speaking of like problematizing cultural purity, that's something that I've been really struck by in terms of Irish identity in that period, at least as it's shown in these archives, like the different factions of like the old English who came and wanted support versus the old Irish who came and wanted support. I don't know if it has something to do with like maybe the old English were more influential or dominating in this like Jesuit context or not, but I personally haven't come across any documents yet. That said, the Irish is there in the Iberian context for sure. There's a noble called Sir Philip O'Sullivan Bear. He has an Irish name as well that I sadly cannot pronounce or say, but he was really influential in gaining support with the Spanish courts when he was sent into exile there and tried to like kind of rally for Ireland, for the Irish cause, especially the Catholic cause. He apparently was like killed by, I'm remembering the story correctly, he was killed by somebody from like literally like backstabbed or something by somebody from like the other faction of like religion. Fact check all of this online. That stuff, it's been a bit since I've looked into the story, but he wrote a couple letters, I believe if I'm remembering correctly, to the Spanish king in Irish, and sent them along with translations. And I just received, hot off the press, a book or an edited volume by my Spanish secondment supervisor with some chapters on Irish language materials by one of the, I think he was a bishop, Lawrence O'Connelly, who apparently was doing translations between Irish and Spanish. So that I haven't found in the archives, but I know that that's like from the same time period, and he was also involved with Irish colleges. And also later on in the college's history, there was some cross-pollination with the Jesuit colleges and like the nationalist movements that were growing in like the late 1800s, and like they were translating more items into Irish at the Jesuit colleges because of that. And interestingly, the first history of the foundation of the colleges was also written in that time period. So kind of in the same moment that Ireland was starting to gather forces for more nationalist movement. So not in my project, basically, was it too long to read? Not in my project, I strangely have not come across any Irish language materials, but that's not to say that there aren't some out there around the time, and then also in the history of the colleges that are important. So yes, definitely I should learn Irish. Add it to my list. Yeah.
It would be
answer your question.
It'd be kind of inconvenient though if you'd started your postdoc and you have 2 years to do it,
Yeah,
and then you discover on week 3, oh, actually, I need I need to read Irish in this curly writing.
Well, I do think that part of the reason the archives haven't really been looked at much before is because people who work on Spanish studies don't tend to work on things related to Ireland, and people who work on Irish studies don't tend to work in Spanish. Like that's not I don't think, to my knowledge, that's like Irish studies. Let's go read some text in Spanish. That's probably not like the first thing people think of. So it's a very niche topic. So yeah, I guess that's in a way like why this particular archive hasn't been used very much, and like these 50,000 documents are still kind of lying in relative obscurity.
Mm.
Though some scholars have done a lot of good work on it, and there's still a lot to be done. So yeah, in a way, I guess it's like it's a bit of a gift that there's just not enough time in the world. That's one thing that I've learned, continue to learn.
But maybe when you come back to them,
yeah.
you'll turn the page and it will just be, oh, just Irish. And they'll be asking for a cup of tea and you'll be away, no problem.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we're just about out of time, but if there's one last question, I have, please.
Curious about, you're talking about a project where you're sitting over like a large box. So
Yeah.
you had to cut it down from like 50,000.
Yeah.
Or I can't remember the year. You're going from like
Yeah.
8 years to 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. The archives cover, speaking of maths, like 350 years about of history. Yeah.
But you're also hinting towards like an interest in like adaptation, like Shakespeare adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious, like those are two like polar opposites of like enjoyment. Like,
yeah.
doing theater is like put it up away, and then you're also like chipping away at like a large project that is going to involve you and like people who have you. So I'm wondering like where your access comes from, like enjoying this.
For enjoying that, that's a lovely question. We should enjoy things, I think, as academics. Yeah, I mean,
or like inspiration, like, or like, is it just that nugget? Is it just like?
Yeah, I think that's become the word of the nugget, golden nuggets.
We should change the title. Problematizing nuggets.
Gold rush of the 1600s archives. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I guess in terms of enjoyment, I think that they kind of those two streams sort of feed off one another. I mean, I definitely come from a literary background, so I could close read things with relish, like all day long. Like that is my happy place. But I think, for instance, when I read the MPhil play, which I actually just picked up kind of for fun, really. I mean, I don't know if that's like a fun text that people, I don't know if fun is a good way to describe that work, but I read it just for myself. And then after having looked at all of these materials, I was like, oh, I started to think about place names a lot in the play. I thought it was really interesting that in a very, I guess like well-known side of English colonial history, that the place names were kind of imposed on people, and it wasn't like an active form of like self-making or self-fashioning. Whereas then when it made me think back to the archives, where, for instance, a lot of it's actually really hard to look up people in the archives because they have like Latinized names, they have Hispanicized names, they have English names. I haven't come across any Irish names yet, sadly, but and then even the Spanish names are like sometimes spelled in like 4 different ways, and so the more I looked into it, the more I was thinking that names in this context and looking at the geographies of Ireland are more like it's actually seeing translation as like a creative space. So the people are kind of stylizing themselves in Spanish and putting their own name on the paper to navigate this new world. So I guess I kind of I'm just a nerd. Like I just really enjoy like that, like cross referencing. Where in the like dominant view of Irish history, that kind of naming, for instance, is seen in a negative light and like a negative form of the translation of empire. Whereas coming from the Spanish perspective, it's actually a space where the people could create their own identities and have a place to at least imagine, you know, their homelands in a different way than what the reality actually was. So to me, that's kind of hopeful, I would say. And I guess I enjoy hope. So also, like,
Hope is good.
it's glimmer, a nugget of hope if we so one last nugget.
What a place to leave us with.
Yeah.
Nuggets of hope.
Golden nuggets.
Okay, well, with the nugget in mind, would you mind joining me in thanking Laura?